Prehistoric Earth looks like a dream until you imagine living in it. The farther back you travel, the stranger the planet becomes, and the more brutal the rules get. People love the fantasy of time travel, but if a real one-way button existed, most of us wouldn't dare press it. Because that world wasn't built for comfort, it was built for endurance. Teeth, claws, venom, hunger, infection. Every day was an exam, and failure meant you vanished. And the most impressive fossils aren't always the biggest monsters. Sometimes the real shock comes from the survivors, animals that suffered injuries so extreme they should have died immediately, and didn't. These skeletons are not just bones. They're medical horror stories turned into evidence. Proof that prehistoric life wasn't only savage, it was resilient in ways that feel almost unreal. Let's start in the late Cretaceous ocean with a predator so heavy it makes large feel meaningless. Prognathodon, a close relative of Mosasaurus and among the biggest of its kind, some reaching around 12 meters. It carried thick, conical teeth and jaws powered like industrial equipment. But one specimen from the Netherlands tells a story that's hard to believe. A massive section of its upper snout was simply gone. Not scratched, not cracked, removed. Chunks of bone torn away as if something tried to peel its face off. The most likely attacker? Another mosasaur, possibly even the same species. Cannibalism isn't a myth in these animals, it's a strategy. What's terrifying is the aftermath. The fossil shows healing. That means it lived long after the injury, in open water. No hands, no medicine, just pain, blood, and the constant risk of infection. Living with a destroyed jaw isn't just agony, it's a biological emergency. Massive tissue damage triggers swelling, pressure, and disrupted blood flow. Parts of the wound can literally die from lack of circulation. Then comes the real enemy, bacteria. The evidence suggests this prognathodon endured for an extended period, possibly many months, while its body attempted to rebuild what it could. But even if it survived the trauma, the infection likely changed the outcome. Not with a dramatic collapse, but with something slower and crueler. The predator may have reached a point where it could no longer use its jaws properly. In the end, it may not have died from the bite. It may have died from the consequences, pain, infection, and the inability to feed. And that's the prehistoric reality. You don't always die in the attack. Sometimes you die in the weeks afterward, as your own injury becomes the cage you can't escape. If any animal symbolizes prehistoric dominance, it's Tyrannosaurus rex. And fossils repeatedly prove that being king meant living through constant violence. Take Stan, a famous specimen discovered in 1987. Around 11.8 meters long, this was a top predator and a walking injury report. Stan's bones carried deep punctures to the skull and ribs, wounds consistent with bites from another T-Rex. Not gentle contact, actual combat. One bite even reached the brain case, implying trauma that would cripple most animals. And then there's the neck. Evidence suggests an injury severe enough to effectively break it. Yet it healed imperfectly. Vertebrae fused, extra bone formed, and the animal likely lived with chronic stiffness for the rest of its life. Add fractured ribs, facial injuries, and signs of bone-eating parasites. Stan didn't just survive fights. Stan survived an ecosystem that tried to destroy him repeatedly. And then there's Sue, the most famous T-Rex on Earth, also one of the most battered. Sue shows what survival looks like when injuries don't come once, but over and over. There's evidence of serious damage to the shoulder region, injuries that likely limited the arm. Broken ribs appear too, consistent with violent encounters, possibly with massive prey. But Sue's story isn't only about trauma. It's also about disease, abnormal bone growth, infections affecting limb bones, fused tail vertebrae, and arthritis-like degeneration that suggests long-term wear and repeated damage. Even worse, those small holes in the skull? Research increasingly points toward parasitic infection, organisms that may have burrowed into the jaw region. And yet Sue grew enormous, over 12 meters, and lived unusually long for a theropod, dying at around 33 years old. That's the shocking part, not that Sue was injured, but that Sue stayed functional, hunting and surviving while carrying pain that would end most animals. This isn't just a dinosaur story. Mammals took punishment too, sometimes in ways that reveal something deeper than toughness. Shanidar I, a Neanderthal found in what is now Iraq, lived with a catastrophic list of impairments. He suffered a crushing head injury that damaged the skull and likely caused long-term neurological effects. He was blind in one eye. His hearing was severely reduced. One arm was withered, and multiple fractures suggest repeated trauma. His teeth were worn down heavily, possibly used as tools, creating chronic pain and poor chewing. On top of that, skeletal disease caused stiffness and additional mobility problems. By every survival calculation, he should have died young, but he didn't. He lived to an age that made him an elder for his time. That survival implies something powerful: support. Someone helped him eat, move, and endure. It's one of the strongest fossil hints that Neanderthals weren't just tough. They were capable of long-term care. Now jump to the Ice Age. At La Brea tar pits, thousands of injuries tell the same story. Predators lived hard lives. One Smilodon pelvis stands out, deformed from early development, leaving the hip joint essentially destroyed. A lone predator with that condition shouldn't reach adulthood, especially when its prey included massive animals, yet it did, fueling debate that Smilodon may have benefited from social support. And back in dinosaur time, there's an even more shocking case. An Edmontosaurus from Hell Creek, with a huge section of the skull missing. Drag marks and the damage pattern point to a bone-crushing bite, most likely from a T-Rex. The wild part? Signs of healing. That means it survived an attack that nearly opened its brain case. Not a scratch, not a close call, a partial head removal. And still it lived. These fossils don't just show violence, they show failed predation and the brutal luck of survival. To end, we meet a predator famous for being both complete and catastrophically injured. Big Al, an Allosaurus with a long list of traumas: fractured ribs, infections, damaged bones, fused vertebrae, and injuries consistent with falls, prey struggles, and conflict. Al survived many of them, until a severe foot fracture became infected. The bone began to deteriorate, and the predator likely starved because it could no longer hunt. Then there's a final outlier from the Triassic, a giant phytosaur, often cited as Smilodon, a crocodile-like monster near 12 meters. One specimen shows multiple limb bones affected by trauma-related growth and infection. across all 4 limbs. It likely didn't happen in one event, meaning it lived through repeated injuries over time. How did it survive at all? Possibly a semi-aquatic lifestyle and lower metabolic demands helped. But even with those advantages, the endurance is shocking. And that's the real takeaway. Prehistoric Earth wasn't only a museum of monsters, it was a world of survivors. Animals that kept moving long after nature should have stopped them.